Okay, right now we're going to have 4 really cool people tell us about some open source projects. At Nori, one of our core philosophies is transparency. That's why we're having this summit. You guys are here because we want your input on how we can make this carbon removal marketplace a reality. We're being completely transparent on our methodologies for carbon removal. We have a GitHub repo for how we plan to account and verify for carbon removal in soils, which is our first methodology. So completely transparent, and that's also why we really like this idea of blockchain and how it could help us with these markets. So in that spirit, and the spirit of carbon removal and sustainability, we have this panel. So the format of this, the reason why I have my phone in my hand on stage is because I will be timing them at 5 minutes to present their work, their open source projects. And then we'll open it up to questions. Christoph will be walking around with the mic, and you guys can ask questions. Yeah, it should be fun. So first up, we have Lorraine from Volans, and she will tell us what you guys are doing in terms of helping businesses to become more sustainable. We also have Andrew Himes, who is a badass. I mean, you guys are all badasses. And helped create the Microsoft Developer Network. And Greg Austic, who's working who founded GOAT, right? And is working on handheld measurements or handheld devices to measure carbon content in soils. And Kyle Birchard, who is helping Nori and is an economist and helping us figure out what are the supply numbers for storing carbon in soil and trees. First off, Lorraine.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And in the spirit of open sourceness and recognizing that I'm going to try to share too much information in too little time, I took the liberty of just putting my Google Slides online. I just tweeted them with the hashtag Reversapalooza because I'm going to cover too much. And if you want to double back, it's there for you. So have a look. The hashtag will be the quickest way to find it, Reversapalooza. And I'm also going to walk us through 3 doors of open sourceness and finish with one about carbon productivity, which is a concept really important to the team at Volans. Happy to tell you more about what we're working on there. But to get us to carbon productivity, I'm going to walk us through 2 other doors really quickly. Behind door number 1 is something we call the breakthrough pitch. And as noted, this is open source, and the link is in the deck online. And it's something that was put together in collaboration with the UN Global Compact, which really brings together thousands of corporations from around the world. Why is it important, and why did we make it open source? What happens here is we've aggregated about a generation's worth of conversations with senior leaders, executives, decision makers within companies, where we've heard what matters to them about shifting their business models to be more sustainable, more regenerative, more circular, all the things we know will be necessary in the future. And this has been a real challenge for a lot of companies. It's a big ship to turn. How do you do it? Why do you do it? What are examples of companies who have done it? So John Elkington, who is the founder of Volans and also coined the term the triple bottom line, something a lot of people are familiar with, has had the pleasure of having many, many conversations with senior executives and sort of created a greatest hits and put it into this really useful free slide deck that anybody can use. We've had amazing feedback on it. It could inform internal strategy conversations. We've also heard people saying it's been really useful for the investor conversations that they're having. So if you're in a company or you're informing companies around a shift, an acceleration towards everything, including reversing global warming and other ways in which businesses can positively impact society, have a look. Behind door number 2, I hope, the resolution will be slim here, but bear with me. This is an open source eavesdropping tool. This is just one view of an online map, which was created with an open source free online mapping program called Kumu. Anybody familiar with Kumu? A few of you. So it's free. You can have a look at this. What are we eavesdropping on here? We noticed there are a lot of conversations about climate change. We were trying to plan our sort of play dates and our schedules. We realized they're happening all around the world at different times. That was a geographic look. This is a timeline look. And the present is in the middle. In fact, Reversapalooza is happening right now. And we were really trying to measure where can we be, what can we listen to, who's talking about what. If you click on any one of those dots, there's more information about the event, where it's taking place, there's a link to it. If it's in the past, relevant presentations and research are all there. We decided to make it visible because we thought other people might want to share, and you can also add to it if you know of an event taking place. So you too can eavesdrop on where climate conversations are happening around the world and try to plan your travels as well. And I'd love your feedback on this. It's kind of a rough and tumble tool, but we found it useful for our own planning. And if you can help make it more robust, we'd love it. It's a free online platform anybody can add. What really brought me here, I will very briefly take you through this and look forward to discussing more. This is an open source tool around carbon productivity. We developed it in collaboration with a number of companies who were saying, we get it. We need to think past reducing emissions, avoiding emissions, doing less bad. But we don't really have a tool or an effective conversation piece to internally with our R&D teams, our product developers, even with our investors and the survey gatherers who want our climate data to say, we are part of drawing down. We are doing more than less bad. What would it look like? So in collaboration with them and several of their R&D teams, these corporations that worked with us, we developed this very back of the envelope, kind of quick and dirty carbon productivity tool. By carbon productivity, we mean the value created in relation to the carbon employed. We're drawing on scholarship that was published in 2008 by McKinsey, life cycle analysis, a number of really thoughtful stakeholders on this. And this is a quick aggregation. Again, the link online will take you into a deeper white paper, lots of research that will take you through this. Why does this matter? Why could it be useful? It could inform R&D, strategy, conversations with investors, again, to help companies get more intelligent on the conversation beyond emissions reduction. I told you I was going to tell you way too much in way too little time. There are sort of deep threads beneath each of these. I'd love to share more. Look forward to Q&A and conversations with you after we have further presentations. Thank you.
Impressive. That was 4 minutes and 59 seconds. Great job. Andrew?
Well, I'll try to do as well, but I'm not sure that I can beat that. So many years ago, when I was at Microsoft was kind of the apotheosis of non-open source philosophy and business behavior. So hopefully we've all moved way the hell beyond Microsoft of the 1990s. At a very high level, the question is, well, so if we want to address climate change, the root cause of climate change, we need to make sure that there's a powerful set of business opportunities and models and structural imperatives that enable us to address the problem. So at a very high level also, the idea that I started with was, so what if we're going to be able to capture carbon in a variety of ways, convert carbon into a variety of useful materials that are composed at least partly of carbon, and then find a way to put that carbon into valuable products that can find a place on a market. So so when you think about climate change, 40% of all greenhouse gas emissions are attributed to the built environment, which means buildings, ports, roads, bridges, and so on. And over the last 25 years, there has been the development of a fairly strong and global green building movement that is focused almost entirely on new buildings and on operational efficiency to create high-performing new buildings that are zero net carbon. So the problem is that that's great, but we need to go about 3 steps further than that in order to truly solve the problem. So we began last fall. This project that I'm presenting is called Carbon Smart Building. It's being incubated by my business consultancy and by the Carbon Leadership Forum at the University of Washington. It's intended to be a global collective impact initiative that brings together all of the major stake players across the global building industry. We started out by developing a theory of change, which meant identify all of the factors within the building industry that need to shift in order to collectively create the transformative outcome that we're interested in. And the vision that we came up with was not just let's make things a little bit less worse, but rather let's find a way to take the entire building industry from 40% contributor to greenhouse gas emissions all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum to being a net carbon sink. In order to do that, you have to actually do a number of things together. You have to create all new buildings. All new buildings need to be zero net carbon in their operation. All existing buildings need to become zero net carbon through refits. We need to reduce embodied carbon emissions, that is, the emissions that are required or connected with creating buildings and running buildings to zero. And beyond that, we need to actually store gigaton scale quantities of carbon in building materials used to make buildings and to refit buildings. So in order to do that, you have to bring together all of the conceivable partners in the building industry. You have to identify a whole set of specific action plans that take us from here to there. The action plans cover just about everything you can imagine, from making sure that life cycle assessment tools and databases are open source and available freely to anybody who's an architect, an engineer, a designer, a developer, a construction company. Anybody who's engaged in the act of making and operating buildings, in other words, needs to understand life cycle assessment for whole buildings. In order to create whole building life cycle assessments, you need environmental product declarations for all of the carbon-based materials that might go into a building, or sustainable materials that might go into the building that actually emit far less CO2 in their manufacture. In order to do that, you have to have product category references that lay out the guidelines for how you created an effective, transparently reliable, and honest environmental product declaration that's scientifically valid. In order to do that, you've got to have a whole set of people doing research and development for how the entire building ecosystem works, and what are all the materials that go into it, and how people actually endeavor to design and build buildings. And on and on and on. Besides that, you have to have materials companies that are popping up everywhere, beginning to use very innovative technologies to create materials that either emit far less carbon or actually store carbon.
So in 20 seconds,
Yeah.
what are you doing to help meet some of those goals?
So what we're doing is bringing together, we've got probably 20 different NGO partners, including the United Nations Global Alliance for Building and Construction, the World Green Building Council, Athena Sustainable Materials Institute, Architecture 2030, and lots of big construction companies and architects and engineers, and on and on. All those companies and organizations are coming to, and Drawdown, by the way, is one of the partners here. All of those organizations are coming together to announce this global initiative at the Global Climate Action Summit in California in September. And we're hoping to, over the next few years then, it's not one person or one organization or one part of the building industry that will do this. It's all of us working together, sharing tools, resources, ideas, and we're going to change the world.
Awesome. We are. We should get that summit. Is the summit in your tool?
I was just going to say, we'll have to get that. I'll get you to upload it onto the map.
Good.
Awesome. Next up, Greg.
Okay, yeah, I realize I'm better at talking about ideas and not very good at pitching what we do, but I think you'll hear a little bit about what we do. So what I want to talk about is why I think, yesterday we talked about from CRCs up, and I want to talk about CRCs back down to how you actually collect that information, and hopefully convince you that that part of the tool chain needs to be open source. So, we've been talking about this system as like a trustless system, but a trustless system actually means that everything needs to be verified. And verification means that everything has to be transparent. And open source is good at transparent. That's kind of its whole shtick. So I think that piece of the tool chain needs to be transparent and open source. So as a counterexample of a similar system that doesn't need to be, think about if you're sending $100 through Western Union, right? You go to Western Union with $100, say, give this to John. Right? All you have to do is 2 days later just call John and say, did you get my $100? It's like, yes, like very simple to verify, right? I didn't have to know if Western Union sent it via plane, train, or automobile. I don't care. I just know that John got my $100. So let's now look through how we get a CRC through something like what we're working on, which is a little handheld device like this, which uses reflectance spectroscopy to estimate soil carbon in the field. So you would put a little bit of dirt in here, and you would take a measurement. So how does that same sort of tool chain, like the money example that I provided, look like with this? So put dirt in here, right? Send some data to me. Not human interpretable. Looks like a bunch of random numbers. So I take those random numbers, and then I put it into an algorithm. Not human interpretable. Don't really understand the algorithm. When I say algorithm, it's a bunch of math, but you have to remember it's math plus all of the data that built the math, right? There's a big model, which is a pile of thousands and thousands of data points, which informed the math, which then took my random numbers and gave me a % carbon. So when you think like you get a value from this, actually, you get random numbers from this, then you get a % carbon from this algorithm. And then you take that to Nori, and through all the complexity we described yesterday, somehow some amount of money gets to John, right? So in this system, as compared to sending him $100, I can't go to John and say, well, I got random numbers 63, 40, 23. What'd you get? He says, I got $20. Okay. What does that mean, right? Like, how can we be confident that that was $20? So there's a big chain in there. And I think because it's much more complex than sending somebody $100 through Western Union, we need to make sure that that's open source. So I think there's 4 reasons why open source is particularly relevant for that chain. 1, open source systems tend to be better in security because more eyeballs looking at problems are more likely to identify those problems before they're out in the real world and screw something up. 1. 2, when something does go wrong, and you're trying to investigate, either someone cheated, someone made an accident, had an accident, or something else went wrong in the process, and he didn't, my random numbers didn't produce the right outcome for John. You can't track it if there's black boxes sitting in the tool chain, right? If you can't look into part of the tool chain, it's hard to figure out what happened. 3, we all have to come to consensus about the algorithm and this device, right? Like, if he's going to buy X amount of carbon credits, he has to believe that my device did what it was supposed to do and that my algorithm is acceptable for whatever it is that he's interested or she's interested in buying. So because of that consensus requirement, most of the parts have to be open anyway. And then finally, and I think this is important and came up sort of a little bit yesterday, but I'll repeat it, I think we have a moral obligation to make those things public. And the biggest argument that I would make there is we're all sitting around here, fairly well-to-do people, trying to figure out how to solve a global problem that primarily impacts people who will never sit in this room. So at a minimum, our moral requirement is to make that process by which it either is going to affect them or not affect them transparent. So that's why I think that, we talked about from the CRC up to getting paid. From the CRC down, it's equally important that that process be open source and transparent and that we develop that openly.
Perfect. Thank you, Greg.
Well, thank you. Working in the environmental policy and management field, I often find I'm usually the only economist in the room. And the last couple days have been really encouraging to see just the range of people who've been brought here today, or who have come here the last couple of days to talk about these issues. I've had many sort of almost conversations just at random, like, here's another economist, so that's kind of great. There's a lot of different ways of thinking about economics, at least I think so. Some people look at it as a decision science, some people look at it as a moral philosophy. I have often found myself thinking about it in ecological terms. And in fact, I think if you really go back to the history, you'll find that ecology and economics are, they share the root eco term, but they almost, the early writings in ecology almost seem like kind of like ecology and economics were like long lost twins, they were separated at birth. So when I started talking with Nori a few months ago about the issues related to not only the demand for carbon storage services, which is how I've personally sort of come around to describing it, and the new kind of additions that we have with cryptocurrencies and the technology, that end of things. It was clear that we were talking in one sense about environmental markets, which have been around for quite some time, and people have been doing a lot of work with them. But there were no real clear comparisons, no like one-to-one, like this happened before, therefore we can predict in the future what's going to happen. And so the question that had been vexing me for quite some time is, how do we know that? How do we figure that out? If there's no existing market that's like this, what tools can we use? I mean, obviously you use the traditional supply and demand, the analytical approach, which a lot of people are familiar with. But reaching back into the other half of my career, when I've studied ecology and things like that, the idea of agent-based models or multi-agent systems sort of just kept on coming to the surface. This is an approach that might work. And for people who may not be familiar with it, these are systems that are designed in software code where you describe agents, buyers, sellers, market administrators, these entities in code that operate according to these really simple rules. I mean, they could be like, buy low, sell high, or on my birthday, buy me, 1,000 shares of Microsoft or whatever. But the really interesting thing, and the people have discovered this dates back to the 60s, is that from these very simple rules, these emergent properties become apparent through these interactions. And that's, to me, that speaks to the ecology side of things. The technology, like I said, the approaches have been around for a while, and they've been developed by people who are far, far smarter than I am, like at the Santa Fe Institute and Caltech and a lot of other places. But one of the things that I think that has brought them into this project in particular, but also just into the broader universe, is the fact that they're available via open source, the open source community. I mean, they've been developed, every tool that I've used in this project up to this point has been built on that structure. And it's an amazing thing. And I don't have time to get into some of the more detailed parts of it, but there are a lot of economic reasons, just to go back to that, that sort of make open source very appealing. But I wanted to point everybody's attention, if nobody has seen this, there was an article in The Atlantic from maybe about a week or so ago. The title of the article is "The Scientific Paper is Obsolete." And don't worry about the title. That's not really, the point of the article is really a comparison between closed source systems, proprietary data and analysis tools, which if you've been in academia in the last God knows how long, you know what I'm talking about, versus open source, as embodied in things like the Jupyter Notebook or the, previously IPython and all these other languages. I think I'll leave it at that, but I think that this sort of provides a complement, to the open source hardware movement, which I also follow quite a lot. It's just an empowering on a much broader scale, and allows more of this, emergent approach rather than but in many cases I would say would be a less resilient, monolithic approach to whether it's data science or economic policy making or getting this information out to other people. And just to finally conclude, I've done some work, another part of this project with Nori, there's been a few things. And eventually I imagine that information is going to be shared and you're going to provide that as well. So I think that's all I had to say as far as where we're at this project.
Awesome.
So.
Thanks, Kyle. What Kyle's kind of working on and was alluding to is we are working through the numbers of what are the supply, what's the storage capacity for soil, for carbon in soil. And we will be sharing that. as soon as we have it finished, because again, we're transparent. And so it's interesting because we've got different like perspectives here. Nori from this like supply, like what's the potential for within soil and forestry, and then the measurement with Greg, and then there's also the business side, right? So that's like kind of the supply side, and the business side here would be, well, what's the potential for just decreasing the amount of carbon that's embodied in buildings? And what's the potential for increasing, I love this idea of carbon productivity, where you're saying, okay, well, for every carbon atom that we emit, let's get the most out of it, right? Like, and so do you guys see like an alignment there between how we could use this carbon productivity? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to. And I'll remind myself and those in the room who aren't familiar that in 2008, a study was published by McKinsey that went deep into the concept of carbon productivity. And since then, there's been some chatter about it. So I'm going to reflect fragments of that scholarship and illustrate what we're seeing as needing greater discussion, because it really boils down to an equation: value created in relation to carbon employed. But there's a bunch of devils lurking in those details. First of all, value. It is sometimes described as amount of GDP created in relation to amount of CO2 emitted. We could spend the next 7 weeks discussing GDP alone and why it's a broken tool and not a useful metric. And so putting that on the left side of the equation and then comparing it to our carbon impacts from the get-go is a flawed principle, and yet it frames the conversation. And so there's other ways to look at it, just financial value, so impact on your bottom line, or other forms of value that may not have a dollar attached to them. On the carbon side, we're also seeing a lot of chatter. Is it carbon emitted, or is it carbon employed in some other way, some of which may remain fixed in the built environment? And so that carbon productivity tool, by the way, and if you are interested, I'm more than happy to share more and hear your feedback. That came through discussion with companies who are like, well, here's how we develop our products. And here's what we think about right now. If we were to really think about how carbon makes its way through our supply chain, through our processes, and out the door into our customers' hands, here's how we could ask ourselves that carbon productivity question. But I anticipate that companies will interpret that different ways. I think the most important piece of this in relation to the open source conversation is that today companies are already expected to, and thousands of them do, report their carbon emissions using the CDP questionnaire, which was Carbon Disclosure Project. Now it's like KFC, it's just an acronym. So if it comes up on the podcast, it may have to stay as CDP. However, the questionnaire does not adequately query the degree to which a company's activities are on a reversal pathway. There isn't really a question to answer. So the questions are open source. The data is made available in the most case. We have a rich data set, but it's answering the wrong questions, or it's answering only half of the questions. So the open source opportunity here is how to collaborate with the CDPs of the world, and they are actively part of the carbon productivity conversation. Thank you, CDP. And how to collaborate with the companies who are trying to answer the questions so that it can be done as intelligently and effectively and practically within the corporate environment as possible. So that's still an active, dynamic question.
Yeah, that's key. And I do want to kick it off to you because were you going to talk about the work at UW? Or
Well, actually, I want to talk about that in relationship to what you just said.
Yes, exactly. Okay, great.
Right? Because I love the way that you just characterized carbon productivity. So this is how it connects for me and why I want to talk to you later. Okay.
Deal. I'm here. I'm here until 1 p.m.
All right, so we're not going to just decide we're no longer emitting carbon, right? Here's the reality. Between now and 2050, the human race will be constructing another 2 trillion square feet of floor space in buildings. That amounts to an average of another new Manhattan every 30 days on the planet Earth.
Jeez.
Right? So we're not going to not do that. The question is, and not only that, but carbon has a time value. When you think about creating a building that might last for 100 years, it's really incredibly important to think about a couple of things. One is the operational emissions. What does it take to operate that building over 100 years? The other is a massive plume of carbon emissions that's associated with the construction of the building right this minute, right? So we have to pay a lot of attention to the what did you say? The efficiency of our carbon emissions in a way, right? We really have to decrease the amount of embodied carbon emissions that are connected with constructing a building down to zero. And there are a number of ways that we could talk about how to do that, but we need to get it down there. So,
and there are companies who are focused on that, and I have to highlight. So Skanska Construction, one of them, Stacy's back there. Hey, Stacy. They voluntarily said, okay, when Trump pulled out of the climate accord, that they said, okay, we're going to commit to these standards, and also let's get to zero emission buildings by 2030. That's an ambitious goal, right? And so reduce what you can using whatever open source tools that they funded a project through UW, and I think you worked with Kate Simonin looking at this benchmark, how much embodied carbon actually goes into different types of buildings. Share that with people so that they understand what the impact is of different projects. Reduce what you can, and then let's offset the rest.
Right.
Let's get to zero, because we do need this zero.
That's true. Everything that you said is just true and really important. And however, there's a certain amount of fraud going on in the building industry today. And by that I mean, for example, last fall, within about 2 weeks, 2 great big technology companies announced that they were just opening massive new global headquarters, and each of them announced that theirs was the most carbon efficient building in the history of the world. One was a small company called Apple, and the other was a small company called Bloomberg. Bloomberg's headquarters in London, Apple's headquarters in Cupertino. So these are actually zero net carbon buildings purely from the standpoint of energy efficiency. However, both of them were built with an extraordinary, incredibly large, significant plume of carbon emissions in their creation. And nobody was accounting for that, and nobody was admitting to that.
So we need transparent accounting so that people can verify.
We probably need something like, I don't know, Nori.
Great. I feel like we could go down into this hole, but let's just put a pin in it. I know I really like to get questions from the audience. Go ahead.
Hi guys, thanks for a great panel. My name's John DeVilliers. I work for Navigant Consulting, and I spend most of my time with blockchain in the energy sector. So I apologize if this question is sort of beyond the scope of carbon removal, but when it comes to open source, I can't tell you how many projects I talk to. They go in my database, and when I come over to, what blockchain platform we're using, I have to put proprietary in-house blockchain network. And so this larger conversation of open source, maybe it's less of a problem for carbon removal than in some of the solutions that I deal with, but I have this sort of nightmare where we get into a future where every potential energy stakeholder, every service operator is working on their own proprietary intranet that can't talk to all the other proprietary intranets. And I guess what I'm trying to say is a lot of companies, I think, are looking at this technology and they're saying, great, this is a ledger of every transaction that's ever happened on our network. I'm going to own that data. Because everybody keeps talking to me about big data and how valuable it is. Why would I make this open source and let everyone on my network leverage it? And I think that's cutting the hamstrings of this technology, really. But I'm curious, as people who have experience with open source, how do you help companies find the value in taking this approach and start to think about how this technology can benefit them at the application level instead of trying to squabble over being proprietary at the protocol level? This is just a huge hurdle that we have to get over. I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I can. I'll just throw my 2 cents out there. I mean, I think there's so many historical examples of what you just described. Like, you see that in the electronics market in standards around like RF, like Bluetooth and other types of similar things where everybody came out with their own thing, right? And then, but I mean, the transition tends to be the same over time. You know, big companies in this space come out with their own thing, so they want to control it because they want to have, you know, control of their own customers, right? And then slowly over the time, they realize that they're spending all this money, like developing and maintaining it, and they can't really grow their customers because everybody else did the same thing, right? And then eventually some slightly enlightened person is like, hey, why don't we, you know? And then everyone at that point has realized that it's been 10 years of frustration and anger, and they're all like, okay, yeah, maybe this is the right idea. So I think sometimes the solution to things really is just like time and experience, and I would argue it's just time and experience, and that process is part of the learning curve for companies to recognize when it's appropriate.
Is it all right if I chime in here? I think that's a really, at Regen Network, the way that we think about that is it's important to have open protocols and sort of an open and standard logic and schema. But that doesn't mean that within that open schema, you can't have permissioned and private data, which is really important. Like a farmer may want to be able to share the metadata related to the carbon sequestration, and they shouldn't be forced to share other data about their cropping strategies or their yields that could put them at a competitive disadvantage for some reason, and they could be taken advantage of. The same is true for corporations and companies who are participating. So we need to be able to incentivize sort of the common standard data schema and logic, and that's where the decentralized, agent-centric, distributed ledger and structured data scheme that we're talking about, not just applied in how we make a smart contract that trusts a signed attestation on a distributed ledger, but how do we actually leverage the power of distributed ledger technology to think about that centralized logic and decentralized governance and ownership of this, basically what needs to happen, what the underlying sort of the elephant in the room, or the part of the iceberg that we keep talking about but we can't quite see, that makes all of this possible. It is the ecological information economy. And in order to unlock that potential, it has to be decentralized, and there has to be a common scheme and logic around all of it. And that's really our basically 100% of Regen Network's focus, and I'll be getting to speak a little bit about this, is on that underneath, that part of the iceberg that is underneath the water, and how do we create the appropriate incentive structures so that quality data and participating in a common logic and scheme is what's incentivized in the process. So that projects like Nori actually have verifiable data to be able to trade quality carbon credits, because otherwise it will be sort of that junk bond metaphor, right?
So I'd love to give another version of the answer and just borrow from, and thank you, that was very thought-provoking. I think the key to your question was why? Why would you not make something open source? And I think we have a really great analog to borrow that all of us can relate to no matter what we do for a living, which is the alphabet. And I like to borrow from other thinkers just to help. And if I look at Donella Meadows, one of the great systems thinkers of our time, who talks about places to intervene in a system, which is what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to reverse global warming. It's a pretty massive ecological system connected to multiple dynamic industrial systems and societal and civil systems. So we've got a lot of intervening to do. So what does the alphabet have to do with that? At the mindset level, which is one of the most powerful places to intervene, when reading and writing was not normal, so literacy was not normal among a certain level of the population, they didn't have the same kind of power that the literate reading, writing, sharing of written materials people had. It's the same code, right? It's the same string of letters. It's evolved. We use 26. Most of us use 26, but there are many languages, lots of different ways to read and write. But that open source code we call the alphabet was not accessible to everybody. Why not? And I think if we ask why, and we see who benefits from not sharing, sometimes the answers aren't very nice. They're around power and control. But there's other versions of not sharing that are quite beautiful, right? Diversity, differences, enabling flourishing of something quite creative and exciting that by making it open source, it would lose its beauty. And we can think of places where language like personal conversations that don't belong in the open forum are very beautiful things. And we may be writing letters to each other using that code we call the alphabet that doesn't need to be open source. So the ingredients are around us. It's the mindset that we apply that will determine just how open we allow that code, that thinking, those ingredients to be. And I would challenge us when we think about open source, whether it's new and emergent technologies that I can barely grasp, or things as fundamental as what I do with A through Z, which by the way is a random sequence, just happens to be we've all agreed on it. Why would I make that open or not? And that question around who benefits is fundamental. I think it's shifting. I think it's an exciting question, but I challenge you to ask that when you think about open source.
I love that. I just want to snap to that. It's so key because it's, Christoph says this all the time, more shots on goal. Reversing climate change and global warming, these are global problems. We need everybody to do what they can. Regen Network is here. They're doing another blockchain application for getting soil stored, carbon stored into soils. In any other aspect or scenario, we would be competitors. But we're not, right? You're here, we're gonna be going to see you. It's all about partnership. We have to make sure that we are sharing our knowledge because it's a mind shift of, from this idea of scarcity to abundance. There's an abundance of success to be had, and there's an abundance of solutions to be made for this large problem. And I thank you so much for mentioning that because I'm so glad everybody here seems to get it, and that's why you're here, and it's all great. Let's do 2 more questions, and then we'll break. Are there any more questions?
Yeah, we have 4 questions.
Oh, we have 4 questions. Okay, we'll be quicker in our answers.
I'll make this a quick question. I really liked Greg's answer to the question about data and stuff like that. But as Greg A. alluded to, one of the things that's increasingly happening is that data is part of the actual method. So particularly in the example of soil carbon, you need data to calibrate models to estimate soil carbon with the types of tools that Greg is building. So how do you approach that problem? And hopefully in an ideal situation, all the people that are beginning to participate in the blockchain have their soils measured for carbon, their data becomes part of this really large calibration data set that we can use. But that doesn't necessarily kind of fit what you were talking about.
Not for everybody, right?
Yeah, not for everybody.
Some people have more sort of detailed and granular instrumentation, and some other people may choose not to, but they can still be using the same schema.
Okay, so I guess that's my question is do we feel confident enough that there are ways to kind of tailor to everybody's individual privacy needs?
Yes, the answer is yes.
Can I? I think there's something important to clarify too, because I think open source is a term that, while useful, we have to know what that means, right? So there's like open data and privacy associated with data, like love letters, and then there's open protocols, right? Which is like the standard by which we all agree that data alphabet
exchanged.
right? So, okay. And then there's the tools by which we move that stuff around, like the United States Postal Service or Western Union, right? Like those are the tools, right, that take the unit and move it along. And then, and this is where we're talking about with soil carbon, and then there's the translating service, right? So like I give you English, translation service converts it into Chinese, right? Now, we have a much higher requirement to trust the translation service than to trust the person delivering the letter. Because I can just call like the $100. Did you get my letter? Did it say X, Y, and Z? Yes, it did. Okay. The translation service, I can't confirm that you got in Chinese what I thought you were supposed to be saying. That's like this, right? And we have to be very, very clear to not just say all things open source, all things private, blah, blah, blah. You have to look at that structure and say, in each instance, what makes sense and what doesn't. So I just want to clarify some language there, because it is.
I just came across, just a couple days ago, the article was written about a year ago from Google Research. The idea of federated learning, has anybody know what I'm talking about because I just learned about it this morning, well, yesterday. The idea that you could actually build systems where people are processing and adding to data locally and delivering a summary or some kind of very small portion of that data, or some key, some signal that makes the system work better. There's a lot of really, I've been focusing a lot on the economics of information as well. I think the flows of information and energy are really a fertile ground for research and discovery. I mean, I don't know if it doesn't answer directly your question, but the idea of building user-defined, member-defined, structures that let them only transmit the idea. Like the example from zero knowledge proofs. Like where if I need to prove my age, I can prove my age, but I don't have to give you my home address and all that kind of stuff. So the technology is there. I mean, it's just a matter of people putting those pieces together and making it happen.
Hi. So I want to pose the question, it's about language and the word emissions. And it seems like it's a word that we're using. It's a relic. I think it's something that has come from before we started thinking about negative emissions and direct air capture. And it doesn't seem to apply. At what point does CO2 become something other than emissions? There's a point. I think once it leaves the source, it's no longer emissions, and now it's just CO2 in the air, atmospheric CO2, and we can do, there are methods to determine what isotope it is and where it came from. So I'm wondering on language, I think the embodied carbon language is interesting. How can we maximize the embodied carbon that's in the materials we're using in our built environment? So I'm wondering from really any of the panelists who feel compelled to answer this question, what are we talking about? I think emissions are only relevant to polluters. As somebody who's not a polluter and isn't really interested in working with polluters, what word can I use?
I'd love to jump on that if I can and just declare I'm a polluter. And I'd like to use that word linguistically to reflect that I think we're all polluters, and it's a great call out. And in the development of the carbon productivity prototype tool that you see there, there was a lot of, I would say, useful discussion that remains open-ended around the use of not just the word emissions, but carbon, CO2, CO2 equivalent. We borrowed heavily on the new language of carbon from Bill McDonough, so some of you might be familiar with living, durable, and fugitive. Which is great, but as soon as you really go there, and any of you working on the product development side, I encourage you to go there and tell us how it goes for you. We got really useful feedback that said, this is helpful, but in real life scenarios, life isn't organized in 3 boxes, right? Living, durable, fugitive. There are moments of transition that can be extremely complex and happening in both directions at the same time. So where I personally net out is, it matters to be specific, to be precise, and to use quality definitions and back up your assumptions. And at the end of the day, the goal isn't to have crisp language in any culture, it's to reverse global warming. So kind of like the Nori, a ton is a ton is a ton, I land on reversing is reversing is reversing. And if you need to use a slightly different way of expressing yourself for one reason or another that you can qualify and quantify, good for you, hurry up. But I think it's a fair call out, and it's a very important one internally with companies, and as the surveys and data gathering processes harmonize, we'll probably see some revisions in the language.
I think it's interesting to note that over the last 10 or 15 years, the language that we use to talk about all of this stuff has gotten a lot more rich and complex. Mm-hmm. An example actually is embodied carbon. So here's an odd contradiction. Embodied carbon is embodied carbon emissions, and we want to reduce embodied carbon emissions while storing more carbon or sequestering more carbon in building materials, right? So it's difficult to talk to 50 million Americans about a topic like this without getting all of us very confused. What I wanted to kind of jump on was, in this discussion of open source, it's important for us all to notice that we're talking about perhaps the most significant evolutionary development in the history of humankind, which is that for all of human history, we've talked about resources in a competitive way. We've talked about how it's a zero-sum game. So the origin of the notion of the tragedy of the commons, for example, which I'll bet most of you have heard of, is that all of the members of the community work individually for their own best interests as they perceive them. And the consequence is that the whole bloody system is screwed up and we're all going to hell. So there's a new notion here, which is that there is great, tremendous value driven by the developing evolution of the concept of open source. There is a new notion in human history, which is that we're all better together. And by noticing all of the commonalities, the ways that we can share data, resources, ideas, the way that we can collaborate on projects, the way that we can open markets and transform technologies together and take advantage of all of the skills and capacities and talents that human beings have collectively, we can address the most important and significant challenges facing us.
Amen. Sean, do you have a question? Are you done? That's okay. Okay. Do we have any more questions? One more. Brian has a question.
You did change your mind? Oh, I think so. Somebody else. Lorraine, just wanted to hear a bit more about carbon productivity. Why is it a useful metric? I can, like, for example, there's GDP and carbon decoupling because there's GDP and energy decoupling, like in advanced economies. But like, I can think of something that has a high carbon productivity, like gold and diamond mining by hand. It's not something we should do. And then something that has a low carbon productivity would be producing food because it has a low price and high carbon. So what's the use of that concept?
Yeah, it's a great question. FYI, one of the other open source tools that we used in creating the prototype, and if you do go online and grab my Google Slides, you'll see there's a couple bonus tracks. And one of them, I didn't throw up here, but it's there, which is there's an open source benchmark called the Future Fit Business Benchmark. Very long story short, it aggregates all of the things a business needs to do to be viable for a flourishing future and benchmarks companies against that. And they were one of the consortium members that created the prototype tool. The reason we engaged with them was to ensure, exactly as you're getting at, that carbon productivity isn't thought of in isolation. So all I want to do is be carbon productive. I mean, that kind of reductionist thinking is what got us into this mess. So it's a very valid question. And I think what you're getting at is what companies need to grapple with when they're developing products and services. Why is it useful? You could argue it's not. We have other ways to solve this problem. Great. Keep going and hurry up. But you might be one of the 99% of product developers out there who are either not thinking about this at all, or they are thinking about it and they're using existing tools that only look at things like fuel source, energy source. So across your value chain, what does the grid look like? Those are useful questions, and I would like to see more renewable and low carbon fuel and energy. But if you're producing food, that is possibly the 19th question you should be asking. And the first 18 relate to other things. So carbon productivity, there are 9 levers across the system, and each one tugs at different parts of what you may be doing in your industrial value chain. It will be different across value chains. One or the other, or perhaps several of those 9, may be more relevant for you. So what we tried to do was create a metric that was sort of industry agnostic and thorough, taking into account life cycle thinking and what we need to be thinking about to both draw carbon down, hold it where it is, and not emit it. A bit of an ambitious ask, hence we didn't do it alone, and we know this is probably the beginning of what I hope is a multi-generational conversation that we succeed on.
To the notion of get there and hurry up, like work on it and hurry up, and carbon productivity. Separating blockchain from tokens, I do not think of, in an economic sense, token-based systems as being highly efficient in carbon productivity for a number of reasons.
And I'm just wondering to the folks on the panel who have an economics background, what they see about the token portion of Nori that excites them given the business case and the social case that Nori is making.
I was an economics undergrad. Sorry.
I can put it differently. Bitcoin is valuable because there are a finite number of theoretical stores of value. Nobody transacts in Bitcoin. It's not really a currency. At best, it's a store of value. What I'm struggling with in this two-day conference is an almost unlimited number of tokens that have a singular purpose that seems more product-like than store of value or transactional. And I only question it hard because I want to get to a solution fast. And I'm philosophically wondering if the market system that's being designed is something that can get places that I don't see, and I just want to see it.
Hey, I would like to, can I give like a quick? So, yeah, I think from a like carbon sequestration and soil perspective, that's kind of the only perspective I can talk from. I don't think blockchain serves, I think using blockchain is marginally helpful, but not critical to actually implementing a system. Like the difficulties in doing it sit almost exclusively elsewhere. Like, how do you measure carbon? How do you do it in a consistent way? How do you convince farmers to make changes? Blah, 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 blah. Like, you could just build like a Ruby on Rails website with a nice backend and like make it happen. So I think that's at least in my opinion, like and I'm not saying that Nori's doing this, and I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad idea, but I mean, it's a really useful tool for raising capital. That's my opinion. That's one of the major motivators. And it also happens to work as a solution for one piece of the process that you could probably do many other ways. That's just my opinion.
I've seen Paul itching to answer this question, and I didn't want to say anything until he got a chance. There you go.
So 2 things. Thanks, Greg. I agree with you. I think of blockchain and cryptocurrency as 2 separate things. They provide different values. Blockchain is providing the transparent ledger and the accounting and showing the true ownership of who owns what asset at what time. Cryptocurrency is providing more of the financial and economic model that enables this, the speculation on the token, establishing a price, and using it for those purposes. To your question, we are talking about creating a finite number of tokens. So there will be established scarcity for the Nori token, whereas there's an infinite number of potential CRCs to be minted and created and then sold for the Nori token. So the economic design of the token, it should be used as a currency in that way. We can talk more about that afterwards.
There was another, this is a conversation that Paul and some of the other folks on the Nori team that I had a few months ago. The idea, the history is full of examples of alternative currencies. It's not a new thing. I mean, you can go back as far as you want, and the way people have, you know, it's just one of those weird meme, you know, in the old Richard Dawkins sense of the term, that just has been with us, you know, as a species for a long time. You know, I look back, there's a book from the 60s called Small is Beautiful. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. E.F. Schumacher, who was a sort of a very heterodox economist, focused on local economic systems. The subtitle of the book was Economics as if People Really Mattered. And so some of the local currencies that people may be familiar with, like the ones in Ithaca or Berkshire, Massachusetts, have been developed to fill a niche in some kind of way. In the Depression, it was literally a question of money demand. You know, like the money supply was not there. And there's another great example of the, and Paul will know this one too, of the banks in Ireland in the 1970s, where there was a huge bank collapse. Banks were closed down for months at a time. and people actually developed their own currency to get by their daily lives. And it was actually just writing checks, and the parties that sort of verified, you know, that the writer of the check had the funds to pay, or the means to pay it back, were the pub owners, because they were this local, you know, source of knowledge about these systems. But to the question of you know, the idea of, I think you said product, you know, like this is a product, it's a token, it's just the thing that's only specific here, it doesn't carry a lot of other value elsewhere. That's not necessarily a bug or a problem. I think it's really, there's a little bit of a social process of the creation of money, which is probably too long of a conversation
Yeah,
for here.
I think we're gonna starting to diverge.
Yeah.
We're running over time, but thank you guys. I think just to wrap it up, I think the key here is you've got two aspects. You've got your technology aspect, which would be your blockchain and your crypto and your verification protocols, and then you have this intangible paradigm shift that it's like, okay, let's change the way that we see value. Let's change the way that we see what we're able to do from scarcity to abundance, and that we can do things in an open source way. It doesn't mean that we don't have privacy ever, but that we are more collaborative and we find ways to synergize to meet our different goals. So thank you guys so much for being here. So thank our